The air over the airfield wasn't just hot, it was vibrating. It wasn't the heat haze from the tarmac, but the sheer kinetic energy radiating off the man who considered the entire runway his personal stage, Alexander Thorne. He was all sleek, custom-tailored suit, a blindingly expensive watch, and the chilling, unmistakable gleam of a predator. Next to him, shimmering under the midday sun, sat his newest toy, a custom-built, experimental helicopter, the Sky Serpent. Carbon fiber, proprietary thrust engines, and a price tag that could fund a small country. He was giving a presentation to a circle of stone-faced investors, men and women whose collective net worth could eclipse small galaxies. They were here not just to see the Serpent fly, but to witness the demonstration of Thorne's effortless superiority. Control. That was his brand. But Thorne's vision was ruined. His spotlight was stolen by a rusty, squat, single-engine plane from the 1960s. It was parked just 20 feet away, its olive paint faded to the color of old moss, a battered warhorse next to a gleaming thoroughbred. The plane, known around the hangar simply as the Old Girl, was only held together, it seemed, by sheer stubbornness and the quiet will of the woman standing beside it. Her name was Eliza. She was the one who scrubbed the hangar floors, the one who saw the sun rise over the runway at 4:30 a.m. every day. She was 68, strong-shouldered, and moved with the slow, deliberate efficiency of someone who had learned the hard way that true work never rushes. She was checking the tie-downs on her plane, adjusting a worn canvas cover, seemingly oblivious to the financial firepower gathered just yards away. Thorne saw her, and the blood rose instantly to his neck. "Eliza!" His voice sliced the humid air, loud enough to stop all conversation. The investors went silent. Phones came up instantly, attracted to the sound of conflict like sharks to blood. What is that relic doing parked next to a prototype of this magnitude? Move that junk. Eliza looked up. She adjusted the brim of her worn baseball cap, her eyes steady behind her prescription safety glasses. She looked not at Thorne, but at his shoes, then slowly up to his face. "It's in its designated spot, Mr. Thorne. It's my hangar space." Her tone was quiet, low, and completely devoid of fear. That calmness, that utter lack of flinch, was a direct challenge to his authority. Thorne felt a primal, hot rage. He had just lost a major bid, a quiet, devastating failure known only to his board, and his ego needed a public, resounding victory. This janitor, this relic of a bygone era, was the perfect, insignificant target. He needed to crush her, to show the investors that his dominance was absolute. He walked closer, pointing first at the Sky Serpent, then back at Eliza's humble plane. His voice dropped slightly, the theatrical shift that signaled the real performance was starting. The cameras zoomed in. "You call that thing an aircraft, Eliza? It looks like a moth-eaten scarecrow with wings. Let's make this interesting. I need to demonstrate the superior velocity of the Sky Serpent to my guests. Me a race to Anchor Island and back. Beat me with that junk, and everything I own, the company, the chopper, the whole empire is yours." I mean every word. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is he insane?" Another, a young intern, was already live-streaming the moment, tagging it Billionaire's impossible bet. Eliza didn't blink. Her hands, calloused and strong, rested on the cold metal of her plane. She looked at the Sky Serpent, then back at Thorne, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of something old and profound in her eyes. "Are you quite certain, Mr. Thorne?" she asked. "That is a very significant wager, and I never accept a challenge I don't intend to finish." Thorne threw his head back and laughed, a loud, hollow, performative sound. "Absolutely. Let's show these gentlemen what real power looks like." He checked his watch. "Your move, Eliza. The clock is ticking." And in that moment, the fate of Thorne's empire, and the definition of true strength, was sealed with a single, arrogant laugh. Thorne swaggered back to the Sky Serpent, but his mind was a high-speed, anxiety-ridden churn. He didn't truly believe he'd lose his company. The notion was ludicrous. But the public challenge was necessary. The failed bid had rattled the board, and he knew the CEO, Maria Reyes, was watching the live feed, assessing his stability. He needed a spectacle of absolute, effortless victory. He needed a sacrifice. She'll be a good scapegoat, he thought, settling into his ergonomic, leather-stitched seat. An example of what happens when obsolescence dares to compete with innovation. He ran his gloved hand over the flight console. The Sky Serpent was his testament to pushing limits. It was faster than anything on the market, relying on brand-new, sensitive microprocessors and untested thermal regulation systems. It was beautiful, but fragile. He dismissed the thought. Eliza's plane couldn't even reach the air density needed to challenge him. This wasn't a race, it was an assassination of a nuisance. He just needed the cameras rolling for the inevitable humiliation. He was so focused on projecting power, he completely forgot what it meant to actually earn it. Meanwhile, Eliza walked slowly around the old girl, her movements suddenly becoming charged with a profound, almost spiritual focus. She wasn't thinking about the company, the money, or the humiliation. She was thinking about a man named Arthur. Arthur was her late husband, a bush pilot who had flown this very plane for 40 years, delivering medical supplies, mail, and hope to isolated settlements across the Canadian North. He had taught her everything: how to fly low under radar, how to listen to the engine, how to trust reliability over speed. When he passed 3 years ago, he left her the plane, a tiny plot of land, and one piece of advice. Eliza, never let anyone tell you that old and humble means weak. She didn't race for Thorne's empire. She raced for Arthur. She raced for the principle that dedication and proven reliability trumped reckless wealth. Her pre-flight check became an extended, loving ritual. She tapped the fuel lines, listening for the perfect metallic ping, not too hollow, not too dull. She checked the oil, not by gauge, but by smelling the thick, warm fluid on her fingertip. She felt the control surfaces, the worn leather of the yoke, feeling the slight give and resistance that told her the rigging was taut and true. Thorne's mechanics had swarmed his chopper with diagnostic tablets and pressurized fuel lines. Eliza was using a towel, a pair of worn pliers, and her 68 years of ingrained knowledge. This wasn't a contest of machines, it was a contest of philosophies. The crowd had swollen to over 50 people, most of them employees who knew Eliza. They loved her quiet, consistent presence. Now, seeing their beloved janitor pitted against their despised boss, the mood was tense. A few brave souls began to whisper encouragement. "Go, Eliza," a young mechanic yelled. Thorne heard it. He smiled, a cold, thin expression. He leaned out of the Sky Serpent's cockpit window, addressing the crowd like subjects. "Notice, gentlemen," he called to his investors, the sentimental allegiance to the familiar. A comforting but ultimately powerless emotion. "We are here to witness the future." He revved the rotors of the Sky Serpent. The powerful blades churned the air into a deafening, terrifying hurricane, kicking up dust and debris. It was a purely intimidating display of raw, expensive power. People shielded their faces and stumbled back. Eliza, sitting in the cockpit of the old girl, simply adjusted her cap and pulled the choke. Her old radial engine caught with a cough and a thick plume of smoke, then settled into a rhythmic, steady, low-pitched thrum. It was the sound of a reliable, working-class heartbeat, a sound that, against the Serpent's high-pitched, greedy hum, was strangely reassuring. A supervisor, pale and nervous, raised a checkered flag near the runway's edge. Her hand trembled visibly. 3 agonizing beats of silence passed, stretching the moment until it felt like it might snap. 3, 2, 1, go! Thorne didn't just lift off, he exploded. The Sky Serpent's vertical takeoff was breathtaking, defying all conventional physics. The experimental thrust engines kicked in with a silent, ferocious surge, and the helicopter became a horizontal missile. Thorne shot directly up to his cruising altitude, a powerful red already pulling away from the airfield. He looked down at his altimeter, then at his GPS perfect. He was already setting records. He allowed himself a brief, self-satisfied chuckle. The game was over. He was focused on the far horizon, ignoring the speck of land he had just left behind. Eliza's start was the inverse of Thorne's. It was a wrestling match with gravity. The old girl lumbered down the runway, gaining speed reluctantly. The roar of her engine was loud, a defiant, rattling sound that seemed to acknowledge its own age. The crowd, initially cheering, fell silent. They watched the old plane struggle to achieve lift. She's so slow, someone groaned. He's going to lap her before she reaches the bay. But Eliza wasn't struggling. She was executing a different plan. She maintained a steep, low angle, keeping the aircraft just 20 feet above the runway. As soon as the wheels tucked in, she didn't climb. She dropped. Eliza flew the old girl perilously low, skimming the surface of the water as she left the coast. She was utilizing the ground effect, the increased lift and reduced drag created when an aircraft flies close to a fixed surface. It's a dangerous, old-school technique that requires constant attention and nerves of steel. Thorne was flying at 5,000 feet, where the air was clean and fast. Eliza was flying in the turbulent, heavy, damp layer of air where the sea meets the sky. It was risky, but it gave her a slight, subtle speed advantage that only a veteran pilot would know how to exploit. Thorne was relying on technology. Eliza was relying on physics and instinct. On the ground, Maria Reyes, the CEO, watched the live stream from her office tablet. She wasn't interested in Thorne's speed, but in his line. He was rigid, predictable. When she zoomed in on the tiny visual of Eliza's plane, she noticed the pattern, hugging the contour of the coastline. Reyes, an old military strategist, frowned. Eliza was finding the hidden, forgotten lines of speed. The narrative tension was now split, Thorne's overwhelming speed versus Eliza's unnerving, quiet persistence. Thorne hit the halfway point and began to feel invincible. He checked his systems, all green, though the thermal regulator was running hotter than usual. No matter, the finish line is in sight. He was already composing the celebratory email to his shareholders. Then, the base shifted. A sudden, thick, gray fog bank, common in this coastal region due to conflicting currents, rolled in unexpectedly, obscuring the island ahead. Thorne's helicopter, designed for high-altitude, clear-weather flight, immediately pitched into chaos. The sensitive microprocessors were overwhelmed by the sudden humidity and temperature drop. A high-pitched, electronic squeal filled the cockpit. "What the?" Thorne shouted. His navigation display, which was the brain of a sky serpent, flashed error. The experimental thermal regulator, running too hot from the initial speed burst, now couldn't cope with the instantaneous moisture. He wrestled with the controls, but the machine was fighting him, relying on its computer brain, which was now scrambled. He was flying blind inside a technological panic attack. Eliza, flying low, didn't even notice the fog bank yet. She was below it, skimming the water, feeling the plane, the way Arthur taught her, not watching the screen. She felt a slight change in the air pressure, a minute increase in moisture. She knew what was coming. She pulled the yoke slightly back, increasing her altitude by a controlled, perfect 100 feet. She didn't have to see the fog to know where the ceiling was. The machine failed Thorne. The pilot adapted for Eliza. Thorne, desperate, overrode the computer controls, forcing the Sky Serpent into manual. But the damage was done. The strain of the high-speed run combined with the system shock had pushed the untested thermal seals past their limit. A terrifying, rhythmic thump-thump-thump started in the main rotor assembly. Then, a sharp, metallic crack. Thorne's world tilted. Warning lights erupted across the dashboard, red, blinding, and absolute. The engine coughed violently, the sophisticated turbine screaming in protest. The helicopter shuddered, shaking with the violence of a living thing being betrayed by its own internal organs. He pressed the accelerator again. Nothing. The pedal was limp. The engine gave one final, gut-wrenching sputter and fell completely silent. The silence was worse than the noise. He was plummeting. 5,000 feet became 4,000, then 3,000. He fought the dead controls, using every last reserve of strength to guide the corpse of his magnificent machine. He managed, through sheer luck and adrenaline, to steer it toward a small, desolate patch of mud and scrub grass on the island's edge, miles from the finish line. The landing was brutal. The helicopter slammed down, the landing gear buckling, the main rotor scraping the dirt, sending up a horrifying fountain of sparks and debris. Thorne was thrown forward against his harness. He sat there for a minute, heart hammering, tasting copper and ash. He stumbled out of the shattered wreckage, breathing in the stench of burning electronics and oil. His expensive suit was torn. His face was pale. He looked at the wreck, his multi-million-dollar symbol of dominance, and felt a deep, chilling dread. He was stranded. defeated, and utterly alone in his humiliation. Behind him, the roar began to grow louder. Not the angry, tearing sound of a high-speed machine, but the steady, unflustered bellow of an old radial engine. Eliza had flown smoothly over the fog bank, relying on her altimeter and the sound of her own engine. When she emerged into clear sky, she saw the dark smudge of smoke rising from the island's edge. She flew the old girl toward it, slowing her pace, descending gently. As she circled the wreckage, she saw Thorne standing there, a pathetic figure next to his ruined future. She didn't feel triumph. She felt pity. She set the old girl down on the uneven, muddy ground near the wreck with the feather-light touch of a true professional, the plane designed to land anywhere. The engine settled into a peaceful, cooling tick. Thorne stared, his eyes wide with a horrific mix of shame and recognition. The woman he mocked, the plane he dismissed, had arrived. The inevitable was here. Eliza opened the small cockpit door. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply offered him a choice that was the final, perfect, crushing symbol of his failure. "Trouble, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her voice low and even. "The race hasn't ended. I can call a rescue chopper for you. Or if you want to finish the race you started, you can ride in the old girl." Thorne could hear the distant, faint sound of the boats carrying reporters and investors. He knew they would reach his wreck soon. If he stayed, the cameras would capture his surrender. If he rode with her, the cameras would capture his humiliation. He had no way out. Swallowing the bitterest pill of his life, he climbed into the co-pilot's seat of the plane he called junk, folding his body into the cracked leather next to Eliza. In that moment, the arrogant Titan became a passenger in his own defeat. The final miles to the designated finish line, the small, pristine private airstrip, were the longest in Alexander Thorne's life. The cockpit was cramped, smelled faintly of old gasoline and earth, and the worn seat was an insult to his expensive suit. He didn't dare look at Eliza. He stared out the window, watching the sea churn below. He kept seeing his own face, captured on the phones of the airfield crew, superimposed over the image of his burning failure. How could this happen? His entire self-worth was built on the idea that new and expensive always wins. He had outsourced everything, his confidence to his capital, his skill to his computers. Eliza, sitting silently next to him, was the embodiment of what he had scorned, earned competence. He finally looked at her. Her hands were steady on the yoke, her eyes focused, her breathing calm. She was enjoying the flight, not the victory. She wasn't gloating. She was simply doing her job, getting the plane from point A to point B, regardless of the cargo. That quiet professionalism was more devastating than any shouted insult. He realized, with horrifying clarity, that he hadn't just lost a race. He had lost control of his own life's narrative. The old girl arrived over the finish line, descending gently. The field below was chaos. Helicopters, boats, and a massive throng of people, media, investors, and every employee on the payroll were gathered. They were all silent, their phones raised, capturing the unbelievable final frame, the battered old plane carrying the defeated billionaire. The old girl landed with a soft, perfect kiss on the runway. The engine was cut. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Eliza unbuckled her harness with a practiced click. She opened her door. Thorne climbed out, his body stiff, his suit rumpled, his demeanor utterly deflated. The cameras surged forward. He had to regain control. He had to spin it. "Listen, everyone," Thorne began, his voice desperate, a shaky facsimile of his usual authority. This was a mechanical fault, a prototype failure, not a loss of skill. A young employee, holding her phone high, cut him off. Her voice was trembling but clear. "Mr. Thorne, sir, you said, we all heard. Beat me and everything I own is yours. You finished the race, but you were carried by the aircraft you mocked." The crowd murmured agreement. The words were already immortalized in video and streaming across the financial world. The CEO, Maria Reyes, stepped forward. Her expression was grave, professional, and utterly uncompromising. She didn't look at Thorne. She looked at the crowd, addressing the situation like a statement of policy. "Richard," she said, using his first name, a subtle shift in formality. Your behavior today reflects not an acceptable level of competitiveness, but a profound lapse in judgment. You publicly insulted a dedicated employee. You recklessly endangered a prototype. And you tied the stability of his corporation to a childish, arrogant wager. She paused, letting the full weight of the words settle. The board has already convened virtually. Your immediate suspension is effective immediately, pending a full leadership review. Thorne opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. His empire was crumbling, not due to market forces, but due to a single moment of prideful carelessness. He had orchestrated his own downfall for a viral video. Eliza stepped forward, placing herself between the cameras and the disgraced billionaire. She wiped her hands on her towel, looked directly at Thorne, and spoke with the quiet, firm conviction of an honest life lived. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "I did not fly for your company. I flew for the promise of the finish line." She looked out at the sea, then back at him. "I'm a janitor. I clean up messes. I do not create them. Your company is a mess. I have no need for it." A new wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd. The woman who could have been an instant billionaire was refusing the spoils. "I teach simple lessons," Eliza continued, her voice gaining strength, reaching every microphone. "My husband taught me that if you take care of the essentials, the engine, the rivets, the people, they will always carry you through the worst weather. The Sky Serpent failed you not because it was new, but because it was built on a foundation of contempt for reliability. I just wanted to finish what you started and show everyone here that consistency beats arrogance." She then turned to Maria Reyes, the CEO. "Ma'am, if your company truly wants to change, you don't need my money. You need my philosophy." Maria Reyes nodded, tears welling slightly in her eyes. "That philosophy is exactly what we need, Eliza. If you are willing, we want you to accept a new role. Chief Advisory Officer of Workplace Integrity and Operations. We need you to teach us how to build a company that honors the essentials." Eliza looked at her plane, then back at the formidable CEO. She gave a small, genuine smile, the first true smile of the day. "If it helps people treat each other better," she said, "I suppose I can set down my mop for a while." As the crowd erupted in relieved, joyous applause, Eliza walked back to her plane. She gave the old girl a gentle pat, a shared moment of victory between two reliable veterans. She climbed in and started the engine. The sound, once mocked, now sounded like a powerful, dependable anthem of triumph. She lifted off, heading back toward the sunset, leaving behind the chaos she had just cleaned up. The image that went viral globally wasn't the crash, or Thorne's pale face. It was the simple, beautiful shot of the old girl soaring into the setting sun, carrying the weight of a powerful truth. The quietest woman in the room, armed only with integrity and perseverance, had ended up steering the entire story. Did that moment where Eliza chose integrity over billions hit you right in the heart? The true power isn't in what you own, but in what you refuse to compromise. Hit the follow button now to ensure you never miss a story where arrogance falls and humble character wins.